Good evening and welcome to Story Hour. I'm Laura Blackwell. My co-host, Daniel Marcus, started Story Hour at the beginning of the shelter-in-place order. And the idea was to keep us all connected through stories while we were apart. Now those restrictions are starting to loosen a little bit, but we're still finding that the stories are one of the best ways of keeping people together. So here we still are. Welcome back to those of you returning, and welcome to those of you joining us for the first time. As usual, we have two writers reading for their favorite nonprofits. Tonight's readers are Sam Rebelein and RS Benedict. If you are fortunate enough to help others during this time, please consider a donation to either or both of tonight's featured nonprofits, the Okra Project and Virunga National Park. Sam Rebelein is reading for the Okra Project. The Okra Project is a collective that seeks to address the by Black trans people by bringing home-cooked, healthy, culturally specific meals and resources to Black trans people wherever the Okra Project can reach them. Black diasporic cooking traditions often use the okra plant for its versatility, and it is associated with health, prosperity, and community. In this spirit, the Okra Project hopes to extend free, delicious, and nutritious meals to Black trans people experiencing food insecurity. You can learn more at theokraproject.com. RS Benedict is reading for Virunga National Park. Africa's most biodiverse protected area, Virunga National Park exists to protect 1/3 of the world's wild mountain gorillas, over 1,000 species of mammal, bird, reptiles, and amphibians, and provide a brighter future to more than 4 million people affected by conflict. Virunga currently has over 689 rangers actively serving to protect the park and local communities. In addition to its sovereign missions, the park is also a major economic player in the province. Its development agenda is focused on 3 pillars: tourism, energy, and agriculture. You can learn more at virunga.org. If you are here on Zoom, feel free to leave your camera on. It can be nice for our readers to see the audience. Please do make sure that you're muted though. And chime in on our text chat if you like, off to the right. If you are joining us on Facebook, thank you, but we may not be seeing your messages right away. So our first reader tonight is Sam Rebelein. Sam Rebelein holds an MFA in creative writing from Goddard College. His work has been featured or is forthcoming in Bourbon Pen, Planet Scum, Shimmer Magazine, Ellen Datlow's Best Horror of the Year, and elsewhere. You can also find his self-published collection, 15 Smells for $12.99 on Amazon. He lives in Poughkeepsie, New York, and on Twitter as Hill Scruff. Sam, welcome.
Thank you. I am so excited to be here. So the piece that I'm reading tonight was actually from Shimmer. It was published a couple Januaries ago, and I thought it would be the perfect way to close out what has been a, I guess, tumultuous January. It's called Fanged Thing. And there's, I'm gonna rate it R for like adult language and some like sexual themes, I guess. But otherwise, I think it's fairly tame. So here we go, Fanged Thing. January was a shit month. It never snowed, sun barely came out of hiding. Instead, a death-cold rain dripped endlessly. Mist curled inwards from the fringes of the woods. It covered the town for weeks as Christmas decorations slowly drifted back into garages and basements. Everything here, just off-road of the Connecticut Wine Trail, lived for the fall. But once autumn was over, people indulged complacently in the holidays, and then they sank miserably into the post-apocalyptic beginning of a new year, into the rain. This was when the winter wonderland died, dumpsters filled with sodden wrapping paper, and the world turned brown and gray for what felt like an eternity. Theoretically, there was Valentine's Day to look forward to, but come on. This was the bleak world in which Jude Osterman was living when he did it, when he read the slip of paper and gave himself nightmares for weeks, which makes sense, honestly. Bleakness breeds bleakness. Jude Osserman, 38, had himself a large white house on a quaint New England suburban lane. He had 2 children and a wife. He sold insurance every day at his father's firm, started by his grandfather, or was it his father's grandfather? Either way, someday it would be his. And he walked his dog every day in the empty hours before work. The dog, a young German shepherd, actually enjoyed the January barrenness. The damp made each individual smell stand up straighter, reach out farther. His steps bounced in January. Jude's dragged. Every morning, Jude passed by the same field. It was down a path behind his nice, pleasant house, through the woods and next to a golf course. The field had maybe been something once. It wasn't now. Just dead grass and a half-broken, knee-high wall of slate chunks. A time-eaten wooden fence wound its shambling way around the field and back, vanishing amongst rain-stained trees. He always took a few moments to look at it every time he passed, but Jude never thought anything of this field. What was there to think? Whatever the thing might have been, it was now just a goddamn field, wasn't it? The dog, of course, thought it smelled great. See, in Jude's painfully ordinary, painfully drizzly town, there was one odd thing. Every evening at sundown, it passed. You could stand on your front porch and observe it as it went by, and most people did. There were some who stood outside every evening to watch it pass, but you were by no means obligated to. Many people, in fact, did not. Some eyed it through their windows. Some made a game of it, trying to predict the exact moment it would approach. The time differed slightly day by day, but not by much. You could gamble in mere seconds, it was so precise. Some never watched it. They stayed inside, staring at the floor with the TV turned way up, played the radio loud, expecting it, dreading it. Jude's wife, Heather, for instance, made a point of washing vegetables at the old kitchen sink every day at the same time. The sink whined deafeningly. She did this to avoid seeing or hearing this odd thing, to escape the usual cacophony of hundreds upon hundreds of glass bottles rattling against the asphalt. No matter what, though, you felt it. When it passed your house, that small round scar on your left temple would always itch, ever so slightly. A tingle. It could catch you off guard if you weren't ready for it, make you gasp, which is why most people were ready for it. Why most people stood on the porch, beer in hand, and waited patiently for the thing to pass. Eyes as glassy as those rattling bottles. They scratched the dull throb in their temple and afterwards went back into their home, back inside to the lives they chose or ended up with or whatever. And the cacophony of glass passed down the street into the night. Nobody thought about this odd thing. What was there to even think? Whatever yours had been, it was now just a goddamn scar, wasn't it? And a minute a day wasn't such a bad trade. Tristan Osterman was 11, and Delilah Osterman was 8. Delilah did not have her scar yet, so in the year since Tristan had gotten his, she had been poking and prodding at it persistently, probing him with questions. "Does it hurt?" she'd ask. "No." "Do you remember what it was like when it happened?" "Nobody does, stupid." Jude, in his armchair by the fire, would peer at his children over the local paper. "Don't call your sister stupid." Delilah would flick at Tristan's head. He'd pounce on her. They'd wrestle until Heather came in from the kitchen, pie stench wafting behind her, and pull them apart. Looking at Jude, "You shouldn't let them fight like that." But he wouldn't even look up from the paper. "They're not going to hurt each other." Delilah could slam her head into the table and pop an eye out. Jude would shake his head. "You shouldn't have bought a table that's all corners then." And he'd snap the paper top pointedly at the table. "The damn thing is a giant marble knife, for Christ's sake." "Dollar," the kids would say together. They'd point at the jar on the shelf. None of it meant anything. It was all in fun, more or less. Happened every night. A complacent routine. And the whole thing was very pretty. But sometimes, very rarely, Jude would find himself wondering, is this nice? And what was that thing? He'd scratch idly at his temple, hardly even noticing he was doing it, thinking, what was that thing? Rarely. At night, sometimes, Jude remembered the girl he dated in college. Not her face or her name, simply that she left for something, somewhere. They fought a week before graduation, or she fought him. asked him to come with her, asked him why he needed to follow his father into the firm, which was always said reverently with capital letters. Couldn't he just give that up? Couldn't he leave that town and whatever she had suggested? Something vague about writing novels pressed itself against the memory, but failed to attach anywhere specific. He remembered they were naked, had just had sex, made love, fucked. The distinction of what that had been wasn't clear to him now, but the tiny room in his college life apartment stank of it, made the argument feel visceral and desperate, which it was, but honestly, it was too late. He already had the scar. In fact, Jude remembered his temple throbbing horribly as she fought with him, drowning out her words. Even in that moment, she was missed, like he had no idea who or what she was, whether he loved her eyes or wanted her body or needed all of it or what. It was too late. Leave? He repeated, numb. Why would I do that? She was from another town. She didn't understand. On a shitty evening in January, Jude stood on his porch. He still had his work suit on, but the paisley tie was loosened. He stared out into the street. The lane was silent. Inside, Tristan sat complacently at his desk doing his math homework. Delilah ate and, unscarred, colored. The sun was just about to set. A screen door clapped somewhere off to his left. Jude listened to the familiar sounds of Phil coming outside. Phil, 59 and fat, stood outside every evening with Jude as they observed the setting sun. The man held a beer in one hand, waved with the other. Jude waved limply back. They always did this. Phil sipped from his bottle, licked foam off his mustache. They stared silently at the hills and the horizon, waiting. Weather, Phil said. The man had this odd quirk where he spoke almost exclusively about the weather, but never made any comment about it. Jude always kind of appreciated this, though, that you didn't feel like that you didn't need to feel like you had to say anything about the weather. Just accept that you were going to be someone who was now discussing something trivial and small. In other words, it wouldn't mean anything anyway, so why bother? Sure is, Jude agreed. The two men smiled. The lane was silent. Firm? Phil said as a kind of question. Good. Kids? Doing well? Tristan's thinking about being a mechanic? Phil grunted. Yeah, figures. Roger's about to retire. Auto shop will need somebody by the time he graduates. Well, he's got 7 more years yet, Jude pointed out. Phil just grunted again and said nothing. Another longer silence floated over them. And the odd thing that happened in this town every night at sunset happened then, and happened somewhat suddenly, as it always did. Somewhere far down the lane, out of sight, came the sound of glass sliding along the pavement, the jagged staccato clack-a-clack of empty bottles bouncing against asphalt. The two men looked towards it. The noise grew, became deafening, a wild roar. Finally, around the curve in the road came the usual shadow. A small, slumped figure with short legs and long, sloth arms heaved itself up the street. In the fingers coming down off its arms, it held countless lengths of twine. As it rounded the bend, the twine stretched out behind it and trailed, at a distance, hundreds of small glass bottles. The pathetic, hunched little figure shuffled laboriously past Jude's home, tugging those bottles on twine behind itself. Sisyphus against thousands of boulders. The thing passed and vanished around the bend at the other end of the lane. The neighborhood became silent, and the sun sank. Phil sniffed. Tomorrow, then. Tomorrow. They went back inside to their families. When Jude re-entered the house, Delilah came running up to him with a picture she had drawn. I want to be a painter one day, she told him, beaming. That's great, he told her, lying. It was 3 days later when Jude did it, approached the shadow and asked for his bottle. You could do that. Everybody knew you could. Everyone in the town had their own, and you could ask for it any night when the thing passed your house. You just walked up to it and held out a hand. You didn't need to say anything. It knew you. It knew everybody. And everyone knew that. Didn't know how, but they didn't feel the need to ask either. Nobody actually approached the shadow, though. They all figured, why the hell would you want to? Jude, for one, had 2 or 3 reasons, but he only thought of them much later, months after the fact, which was, obviously, too late. Jude's first reason came a week or two before he did it, just as the calendar flipped bleakly into the new year. It had been a typical night. The shadow had just disappeared up the road. The silence and the dark were deepening. Jude and Phil were lingering outside for a minute or so when Phil abruptly turned. Heard in town, you know John? Yeah, heard he never had his removed. Jude blinked. How? Phil shrugged. I don't know. Guess he was out of school that day. And they just let it slide? Jude couldn't believe it. I guess so. He just lives like that? Phil laughed. I know. Bizarre, man. I'm thinking, no way, man. I would never do that. Don't want to see mine ever again. Can't even imagine having it in me. Not curious? Not at all. No way. His voice cracked at the end of his speech. He swilled beer to steady it. He finished off the bottle and gazed into its bottom. He sniffed again. They sank into a deep silence, thinking, gazed out at the growing darkness and the rain. Weather, Phil said, after a long time. Sure is. The second thing that probably did Jude in came the night after Delilah showed him her drawing. Ed, who lived alone across the street, was the one who did it, the smarmy bastard. Ed said things like, what do you think about this cold front? And think the Giants will make it this year? God, Jude hated him. Unlike beautiful, simple Phil and his weather and giants. This night, the rain came down in a fine mist, moistening everything before you even really noticed. Phil and Jude were the only two on their block who stood and observed the passing of the shadow. But on this particular evening, Ed marched out of his house the second the thing came before his lawn. He bounded down his front steps and approached it. Jude and Phil held their breath. The figure stopped. The silence of the glass then was even more deafening than the sound itself. Ed held out a hand. The thing gingerly laid its bundles of twine on the ground. With slow and delicate movements, it picked one in particular. It reeled in the bottle, handed it to Ed. Without flinching, Ed pulled the rubber stopper off the bottle. He grinned, the bastard. The thing watched him. He flicked the cork onto the grass of his front yard, tapped the bottle mouth onto his palm. A strip of paper slid out. He handed the bottle back to the figure, unfolded the paper, and Jude could hear it crackling from across the street. The paper was yellow and old, had been folded up for a long time. Ed took some time reading whatever it said. Then he laughed. He waved the paper in the air at them. He called, Hey, it's, He almost told them what it said. The men twitched, expecting the worst. But Ed stopped himself. He looked at the paper again, smiled. He waved his hand like he was swatting a fly. Oh, shit, he said. He tapped the paper against his palm and went back inside. The thing watched his house for a moment. No lights went on, nothing. It picked up the pieces of twine and went on its way. Ed's house remained dark after that. What probably did Jude in the most happened 5 days later. He was walking the German Shepherd past the same old field behind his house on that exceptionally bright but still shitty morning when he stopped dead in his tracks. Something new had appeared in the field. A prominent, shining black stone stood in the middle of the grass. The shepherd wagged its tail, barked. Jude peered at the stone and realized, suddenly feeling very cold, that it wasn't a stone at all. He had never seen the shadow during the day before. No one had. The contrast between its usual half-unseen appearance and this full-on glimpse in the clear morning light was startling. Jude could pick out all its features, could tell that it wasn't a small man or child or whatever he'd assumed it was, nothing of the kind. It was a small, black-furred humanoid thing. Its coat was matted and tangled. It crouched low amongst the dead grass, watching him. The black skin of its hairless face was stretched tight over the bones, giving the mouth and eyes an eerie, wide look. The eyes were lidless, flashing globes of yellowish green. There was a stub of a snout filled with sharp teeth like rail spikes. It looked like a cross between a rat and a monkey and some homeless, demonic child just sitting there, gaping at him from the grass, ugly and horrible. What the fuck? Jude thought, over and over. His heart hammered against his ribs. He was sweating, even in the dreary January cold. His mind screamed, how did I never see? Has anyone ever seen? What the fuck? What the fuck? The dog barked harder, struggled forward. Jude glanced down, tugged at the leash. When he looked back up, the thing was gone. He tried to grapple himself back down to earth, but the woods swam around him. It was a child in a mask. It had to be. A large raccoon, a fox covered in dirt, a scarecrow, leftover Halloween decoration, art installation? Surely it was not the same thing that stalked through the town every night. Did it crawl out of the earth, fall from the sky, dig its way out of a dead pile of leaves? Did it live in this field? Were there others? Why had no one thought about this? What the fuck? What the fuck? What the fuck? For the first time, Jude wondered, what was that thing? He thought about it all the way home. It made his temple ache, made the scar there sing with pain. And that's what really did it. Him thinking, seriously thinking for the first time, seriously wondering, what had that thing been? Over dinner that night, Tristan spoke about school, his teachers, an upcoming field trip. He talked about his woodworking class and how he wanted to take shop class when he got to high school. Delilah talked about her art. Jude sat there still thinking, was this nice? Sitting at a candlelit table in a big warm room with the German Shepherd curled up in the corner. Was this good? Being able to be home with his wife and kids, eating a hearty dinner with red wine and laughter, and being able to ask Tristan how he did on his math test, finding out he got an A minus, looking over at Heather and loving her and loving Tristan, and Delilah with her adorable little paintings that he knew secretly would not last, blood pumping, pumping, pumping through his temple, the dog hoof huffing as he dreamed, the clock in the kitchen ticking, pipes tinging as they heated up, and the whole thing nice and simple and perfect. And his wife was saying something. Sorry, what? He blinked. The room seemed suddenly bright and crowded. Heather blinked back. Sorry? Sorry, what were you saying? She frowned at him. Are you all right? I'm fine. I'm just tired lately, I guess. She nodded sagely. Must be the weather. Everyone feels gross. Of course, he said, unsure. He rubbed his temple. From somewhere across the table, in the corner of his eye, the furry, black fanged thing leered at him. That night, when Jude crawled into bed, Heather was already there. She folded into him as he laid down, fit herself to him like a puzzle piece. She called to him from somewhere far away. He tried looking at her face, but saw instead the black fanged thing shrouded in a fine mist. In an instant, his blood was cold, his forehead damp. He found himself drowning in the same thought. It might have been something small. It might have been something important. It might have been grand or fun or something. What the fuck was it? What the fuck was that thing? Jude. She cleared. The mist vanished for a moment, and he saw her. He said. You okay? Yeah, fine. Long day. I love you. I love you. She looped her arm over his chest, moved it around, twisting her fingers in the curly black hair there. She kissed his stubble, said his name. He turned to her, and they dug into each other's clothes. What it ended up being was something vague, lost between making love and fucking. Afterwards, they lay tangled together, all limbs. He closed his eyes almost peacefully, almost asleep, feeling almost good, and she shot out of bed. She padded across the carpet to the bathroom, brushed her teeth, took a shower, cleaned herself, came back into bed fresh and new and unmarred. She purred. That was nice. The fuck stink of his college apartment wafted into his memory. The black fanged thing leered at him from the window. He had nightmares about it, felt it eating him. He awoke still feeling the teeth. He stayed in bed, sweating against the flannel sheets, and listened to the sounds of his family. Tristan eating cereal downstairs, the wooden fracas of Delilah's colored pencils. Theoretically, these were comforting sounds. Instead, they made him feel worse, made the imaginary tooth marks down his limbs and across his belly burn. Why did he keep thinking about it? It was just a goddamn monkey, wasn't it? See, they did it when you were 10. They had this big day in April when everyone wrote essays on what they wanted to be when you grew up, what you truly wanted to be. You wrote it in history class, which was somewhat ironic, honestly. The history teachers, smiling, encouraged their students to be as ridiculous and as horribly truthful as they could. So the essays were all about astronauts and paleontologists, movie stars and world travelers. Every 10-year-old in the town did this, explained what their beautiful, ridiculous lives were going to be, their craziest, truest, out of this worldest dreams. Then they were filed into the gym, where they spent the rest of the day waiting their turn. They sat in the bleachers, clutching their essays, murmuring. They glanced anxiously towards the small white tent in the corner of the gym. They were called one and one by one they went into the tent. The tent itself is a mystery. Nobody knows who organizes it or what's inside. It just shows up, and you have to go. All that's known is that you leave with a bandage on your temple, and your essay, the astronaut, movie star, pop singer dream, has vanished, and you are unable to remember what it even was. After it's over, you go home and have a nice meal prepared by your mother, paid for by your father, and you really appreciate it for the first time. Delilah, of course, was 8. Her dream would not be taken for 2 more years, but when it did happen, inevitably her mother would ask, "Why don't you color anymore?" already knowing the answer. And Delilah would just shrug. "I just don't want to." And she would lead a simple, perfect, small town life. So it happened that Jude got it all stuck in his head. Couldn't stop thinking about it, about that college apartment and the girl and something about novels and not selling insurance, the black fanged thing. And the next evening at sundown, Jude turned to Phil and said, "I'm going to do it." Phil blinked at him across their yards. "Do what?" "Well, look at mine." It was like he'd stabbed Phil in the gut. The man made a large O with his lips, shook his head. Why? Drew shrugged. "I'd like to know." "Man, Ed's an outlier." Phil pointed with his beard to the darkened house. "That is not the usual. You shouldn't. I mean, most people see theirs and." "I know," said Jude. "They flip." "I know. That's why nobody does it." "I know. But I could take it. Ed seemed to. I want to know." Phil was quiet for a moment. He sipped his beer. Finally, without looking at Jude, like Jude was already dead, he said, "All right, man. Whatever." They were quiet, waiting, and as if knowing it might be for the last time, Phil said, "Weather." Before Jude could respond, the end of the lane clattered. The thing came around the bend. Jude could now picture its eyes, fur, and fangs clearly, and it made it worse knowing that Phil, who had never thought or wondered about it in the light of day, could not bring himself to ask the questions now eating at Jude from the inside out. The black fanged thing approached. Trembling, Jude stepped off his porch. The thing turned to face him, still coming, still rattling. Jude moved down the walk in front of his house in a trance, shaking, legs hardly obeying. When he got to the sidewalk, the thing stopped. Silence boomed down the block. Night deepened. From behind him, Jude could hear Phil muttering, "Jesus, man, Jesus." Jude held out his hand. From this close, he could smell it, the phosphorus reek rising off the creature's hide, could hear its rasping, hollow breath, feel the sickly, lemon-colored eyes. Gently, the thing placed its ends of twine on the ground. It took some time, selecting the one that belonged to Jude. Finally, it picked one out of a large cluster. Jude's bottle was stuck to 3 others in a big clump, so like it was moving through mud, the creature reached out a long, loping sloth arm paw and peeled the twine free. It seemed to take years to reel in Jude's bottle. When it finally rolled up the street and into the creature's hand, Jude felt like he might fall over. It might have been something small. It might have been nothing at all, or everything, or an even more horrible thought dawned on him. What if he read the paper and it was exactly what he had now? Maybe that was what had happened to Ed, or maybe the paper was blank. Maybe the dreams were all gone. Jude took the bottle. The creature let its hand drop to the ground, and it watched him. The bottle was small and round, sort of like a cannonball or an inkwell. A square rubber stopper was jammed into the mouth. Jude removed it in one smooth pull, dumped it on the lawn. He shook the bottle by his ear. Paper tinked inside. He upended the bottle into his palm, and the paper dropped silently out. As Jude unfolded it, the creature gathered up its lengths of twine and moved on. Phil had already gone back inside, not wanting to see. The paper shook between his fingers. It took him several tries to hold it open enough so that he could read it, and when he did, he almost laughed, like Ed had. It was his essay, his goddamn essay from when he was 10. He read it, blinked, read it again, and almost threw up. He couldn't remember writing it at all, couldn't remember wanting that. He stood there for several minutes alone as darkness bunched up around him. Finally, he let the paper curl back up in his fingers. When he was ready, he brought it and the bottle to the garbage can next to the garage and threw them in. He wondered what Ed had seen, wondered what Phil had written, Tristan, Heather. He knew what Delilah would write when her time came. He saw now the black fanged thing way too clearly in his mind, saw it panting that phosphorus, horrible breath on him. An alien. He tried to decide that that's what it was, an alien thing, penned by a 10-year-old stranger. Shaking, Jude went back inside, into the well-kept living room, where his family was sitting around the television. Heather made room for him on the couch. He wrapped an arm around her, the other around Tristan. He tried to slow his heart, clenched his hands into fists to keep them from shaking. Heather didn't even notice. Delilah was on the floor, coloring. Jude forced himself not to look at her. A small voice at his side whispered, "What did you see?" Jude turned. Tristan gazed up at him with deep, wondering eyes. Jude put a hand on his head. The boy's hair was soft and young. Jude pulled him a little closer. "Nothing important," he said, almost believing it. Tristan looked back at the screen. He chewed his lip. Several minutes went by. "I kind of want to see mine," Tristan said. Jude looked back at those eyes, so blue and unmarred. "Nah," he said. He offered a reassuring shake of his head. "You're better off. Trust me." Tristan said nothing else. Jude tried to convince himself that he hadn't just lied. He was still trying when he went to sleep that night. In identical houses throughout town, identical televisions buzzed and hummed. The town was content now that the 1 minute was over, at least for the day. In the morning, Jude would go to the firm. He would sell insurance, as his father had. He would come home and be with his wife, his dog, and his kids, whom he loved. He stopped walking by that field every day and stopped standing out on the porch at sundown because it made his scar hurt, because he could no longer do so without seeing those shining tennis ball eyes, without remembering what young, glorious things they held behind glass. As January dragged itself along, Jude managed to put it all out of his head, managed to stop wondering again what the thing had been. He managed to enjoy the complacency of his simple, small-town life, even with its one unbearable minute each day. He even managed to enjoy the shitty and unending January rain. He loved this life. He chose this life. He felt good about it. And it was nice. Really, really nice. Right? And that is the Black Fanged Thing.
My.
a great way to say goodbye to January.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sam. That was a great story. One of the really cool things about hosting Story Hour is getting to hear authors that I may otherwise not have had exposure to. So I'm definitely going to be looking for your other work. So, so thank you very much.
Thanks, man. Yeah, my pleasure.
All right. Deep breath, short pause. All right, on to part two. I'd like to welcome back RS Benedict. She read for us in August. We're really happy to have her back again. RS Benedict.
Seems like it happened yesterday and also 100 years ago somehow.
I know, August. What? August? Seriously? Yeah. I just got my first Moderna shot yesterday. I'm a little bit zoned right now, but anyway. RS Benedict has an MA in linguistics and has done precisely nothing with it. She taught ESL in China for a few years before returning to New York to become a bureaucrat. Like most millennials, she has a podcast. It's called Write Good, RITEGUD. It's hosted at kittysneezes.com. So check it out. And RS Benedict, the floor is yours. Thank you for joining us again.
Thanks for inviting me back. Thanks for having me back. Today I am going to read a short story called Beelzebub. And just to warn you, this one has some adult themes in it. So this is not for the kiddies, definitely not for the youngins. This story just came out in the New Haven Review. Although I wrote it a couple of years ago, but it's been sometimes it's a long journey before it ends up into print, as I think we all have experienced. So I think I'll just dive into this one instead of trying to set it up, because it's probably better experienced blind. So I will jump into it now. I don't know when exactly I began to attract flies. I only remember when I first noticed it. I was at my mother's house, brunching. She was talking about her diet, or my diet, or my father's diet, or my brother's diet, or her coworker's diet. It doesn't matter. What matters is that she stopped to say, "Oh, fuck," at a fat black housefly that had landed on her eggshell tablecloth to suck on the droplets of peach Bellini I'd spilled. My mother rose from the table, grabbed a napkin, and chased the thing around her living room, across the white carpet, past the freshly vacuumed couch. It flew out of reach, up to the cathedral ceiling, but still she waited for it below, now armed with a rolled-up copy of The New Yorker in hand. Oh, says my connection's unstable. It was when a second fly appeared that I realized something was wrong. One fly could have snuck into my mother's hypoallergenic fortress, but not two. "Ugh, you brought them in with you," she said. Later, after I went home, I noticed two flies buzzing about my apartment. I took out the trash, cleaned the sink, and disinfected the counters. The next day, there were 3 flies. They found me at work, too. And at the supermarket on my way home, I saw flies crawling on a pyramid of oranges. I drove with the windows open, though it was late October, hoping the air would sweep the flies away. But they made it home with me, or maybe their reinforcements hunted me down. I poured on bug spray. I fumigated the apartment. I sealed all my food in airtight plastic. I put up fly strips and changed them every day. I switched soap, shampoo, detergent, skin cream. I washed all my clothes in hot water. Still the flies came, 1 or 2 more each morning, fat little satellites ever orbiting. I don't think anyone realized they were coming from me yet, but people must have picked up on it subconsciously, For my supervisor at work pulled me into her office on a Friday afternoon to tell me she had to cut my hours. Nothing personal. It was a difficult decision. But with business being the way it was, she couldn't justify keeping me full-time. Over here. I made an appointment with the doctor before I lost my health insurance. He shrugged his shoulders. Could be a hygiene problem, he said. Do I look dirty? I asked. Do I smell bad? He sniffed. Guess not. Maybe if you lost some weight. Blood work did not reveal the cause, though I found my iron was a little low. More flies came. I gave up swatting at them. Their presence around me was at last noticeable, and as a result, my status at work went from part-time to no time. But now my supervisor did not apologize. It was not a difficult decision. I was fired, not laid off, so unemployment wasn't an option. I considered going on disability, but attracts flies probably wasn't a diagnosis that the government would accept. I couldn't imagine who would hire me. Were this the 19th century, I would have joined a freak show, but ours is a more enlightened era. So I took to the internet, where I quickly learned that yes, there is indeed a subculture centered on fly-covered women, and yes, the subculture has some very devoted fetishists, and yes, in fact, there was one of them living not too far away. Having no other options, I accepted his offer. We met at a restaurant of his choosing, an upscale bistro that served cocktails in mason jars and needlessly expensive interpretations of mac and cheese. I arrived first and sat at the table he'd reserved for us under the name Jeffrey with a G. I was about to leave when a surprisingly normal-looking man in his mid-30s appeared and sat down across from me. He had brown hair and an average build. He wore business casual attire. He smiled at me and said, "It's you." I plucked a fly out of my Merlot and dropped it in a napkin. "Sure is," I said. "What's that joke?" he asked. "Waiter, there's a fly in my soup." "Well, don't shout or else everyone else will want one," I said. He laughed long and loud. Nervousness killed my appetite, but I ate anyway because he was paying and all I'd had so far that day was a sleeve of saltines. We chatted about our favorite Netflix shows, skincare, hobbies, and so on. And all the while he marveled at how I endured the insects crawling on my shoulders. "You're the real thing," he said. "No tricks, no honey perfume or anything like that. Wow." After the meal was over, I joined him in a room at the Marriott a block away. There, as negotiated in a private chat the day before, I lounged in an easy chair with flies buzzing about while he politely masturbated at my feet. I wasn't ready for more than that. Not on a first date. I earned $300 for the evening's work, which I later learned was far too little, plus dinner, plus a hotel stay. The experience hadn't been anywhere near as degrading as the time I'd waited tables at an IHOP. So when I got home to my empty studio apartment, I logged back on to find more clients. This, I understood, was my life now. Jeffrey was my sole source of income for the first month. We met twice. But soon I found a banker who lived an hour and a half away. He wanted a cam show first, but because the Wi-Fi I mooched off the struggling vegetarian restaurant below my apartment was patchy, I opted for a phone call instead. When he heard the hum of little wings over the receiver, he decided I was worth the commute. The banker was short, with soft pink skin and hands like a baby's. I refused to let him touch me. I tied him to a chair, as requested, much too slowly, for I'd never done it before. This annoyed him, but when I sat on his knee and my flies began to flit around his head and alight upon his flesh, he moaned in ecstasy. He came hands-free, spraying onto my jeans. I left him tied to his chair as I cleaned my pants in the bathroom sink. The banker introduced me to a friend of his, and my career took off from there. I moved into a better apartment and paid for my own internet. I streamed live shows online where I sat with flies crawling on my face while I talked about how their little feet felt on my skin. Now that I had a steady income and a job that didn't eat up much of my time, I exercised more, wearing a cloth mask so I could pant without choking on bugs. I ate leaner, meal replacement shakes and kale smoothies, things I could suck through a straw so that the flies could not land on it. I lost weight. I looked fantastic. Business picked up. I learned how to breathe through clenched teeth and how to speak in short utterances with pursed lips so as not to swallow a bug. I bought new clothes for my new body. Jeffrey gifted me a beautiful pair of knee-high boots for fall, and he kissed them as the flies crawled upon the leather. One of my clients invited me to an art opening in New York City. There I sat on a dais and sipped free Pinot Noir, wrapped in a flittering haze. A crowd watched. Nobody masturbated. My flies infested a found art piece consisting of a roll of hay from a farmer's field. The audience loved it. The sculptor declared it a brilliant work of spontaneous mixed media collaboration. A painter asked me to model for him. When I asked about payment, he called me a whore, which was fine. Whores can pay the rent. Muses cannot. Despite his ire, I managed to ooze into the art scene somehow. I was invited to parties, and if I did not attend them, my absence was noticed. People praised my enigmatic silence, which was nothing more than a way to avoid inhaling insects. People adored my stoicism, which was nothing more than weary resignation to forces I could not control. Potential lovers surrounded me, wrote songs about me, painted pictures of me. Men are fascinated by a woman who doesn't say or do very much. I learned soon that once you are loved by the rich, you don't have to work to survive. Things somehow find a way of being paid for. I was treated to dinner at the Four Seasons, where I watched flies crawl on my Asian gravlax. Acquaintances passed me unbelievably pure cocaine. An avant-garde composer I'd befriended offered me an apartment in a building he'd inherited from his parents. The entrance had a doorman and a marble floor. It was the most beautiful place I'd ever lived in, and I filled it up with flies. I was interviewed by Vice, photographed by Fusion, and profiled in The New Yorker. Then came the inevitable flood of think pieces. I was accused of plagiarizing Yoko Ono. I was said to be taking advantage of the twin privileges of whiteness and conventional beauty. A homeless person of color would not have been rewarded for being covered with vermin. Then came the backlash to the backlash. The art world was the villain for enabling and exploiting a woman with a terrible medical condition. Or I wasn't being exploited. I was empowering myself by owning my physicality. All of them were true, or none of them. It didn't matter. The swarm around me still thickened. It occurred to me that their ever-growing presence could be a sign of worsening health. I knew it would be best for me to treat my condition, or at least keep it from getting too severe. Now that I had the money, I saw specialists, endocrinologists, dermatologists, toxicologists, entomologists, Reiki practitioners. Each diagnosis contradicted the other, and none of them could fix me. I felt unfaithful somehow, as though I'd betrayed the flies after they had given me so much. I got older. At my agent's advice, I began to shift to the inspirational self-improvement market. A ghostwriter pumped out a book in my name titled From Flies to Fortune: How to Make the Best of a Bad Situation. I gave a TED Talk about body image. I taught self-help seminars and visited talk shows. The rich loved me. They held me out to the world to say, "See, you don't need health insurance to succeed." And the flies still came, more and more. I could conquer a room with my personal swarm. I started sleeping under a powerful fan to keep them from clogging my breathing passages at night. For this reason, I began to wear my hair in a braid. My mother stopped inviting me to her home. In our phone conversations, she took great care to avoid mentioning my talent. Instead, she asked why I hadn't found a husband yet. That Jeffrey guy seemed nice. She didn't understand why he wasn't interested. Some girls you date and some girls you marry. And you don't marry a girl covered in flies. I amassed a greater social following that now included prominent medical researchers and spiritualists. I smiled gently through endless conversations with strangers who thought my silence was noble. Their questions and comments and business pitches melted into the buzzing, forming an ever-present white noise. To get away from it all, I booked a single-occupancy yurt at a mountain pond in Vermont. I drove there alone, windshield wipers plowing clear arcs through the layer of glimmering black bodies on the auto glass. A few of the flies got trapped in the car when I shut the doors. I left them there. I dropped my cell phone, vibrating with messages and unanswered calls, on the cot in the yurt, whose white canvas walls throbbed with insect life. Shrouded in a cloud of wings and segmented eyes, I walked to the end of the dock, stepped into the water, and sank to the bottom, where my entourage could not follow. Above, the flies wheel and wait, or dash their bodies against the surface of the pond to drown. But down here, if only for a moment, it is painfully, gloriously quiet. And that is Beelzebub.
That was awesome. That was such a great story, man. So nicely read, beautifully
Thank
written.
you so much.
Both stories tonight. Holy cow. We say this every week, right? I mean, we don't generally plan for any kind of sort of dynamic connection between the readers or the work that they're reading. But there was a real sort of essence here across both stories tonight that was just really cool. So thank you, RS Benedict, Sam Rebelein. Really great work. Really wonderful evening.
Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, great to have you back. And thanks to all of you out there for joining us again. Yet another week, Story Hour. Next week, we've got Ben Monroe and the Marie Brennan half of M.A. Carrick. So please join us. Meanwhile, take care of yourselves, take care of each other. Have a great week, and see you soon. Good night.
Night, night.
Yeah, thank you. Good night.